everyone. In this video, I will show you how to set up your Ruby on Rails 7 application on Docker. Why we might need to do something like that? You might need that to make your development and deployment really easier if you're working, especially if you are working with a team. How is that? Well, Docker containers will provide you with a way to package or containerize all the packages or dependencies of your applications with its specific versions in one place, which is the Docker container. After that, when you add your dependencies or your application dependencies and the packages in one place, which is a container, can after that share this container or this Docker file with whoever you want to share your application with, either it's your team or your server which you are trying to deploy your application to. And with one command line, this container or this Docker file will run and install the exact dependencies that you want in the other machines of your team members or the servers that you need to deploy the exact same versions of your dependencies in. So now all you need to have is a Docker installed in your system, and you can find tons of tutorials on how to do that or how to install Docker on your machine. And a basic knowledge of Docker, as this tutorial is not about explaining Docker, but it will be explaining how to run Ruby on Rails application inside Docker. To set up your Rails application with Docker, you have two cases. The first one is that you have an existing application that you need to Dockerize on your local machine, or you have a new Rails application. Okay, and in the new Rails application, you have two ways to work with also. The first way is to create your Rails application first on your local machine, then Dockerize it. And this case will be the same as the first case that you have an existing application, or you need to create your Rails application entirely inside the Docker container. So you need to first build the Docker container, then create the Rails application inside it. In this video, I will illustrate the first case, which is that either we have existing application and we need to Dockerize it, or we need to create a new application inside our machine and then Dockerize it. Let's assume that you have an existing Rails application on your machine, or you need to create a new Rails application first. So let's create a new Rails application. So we have this application on our machine first before we create our Docker container. So maybe we can run Rails new, and let's call it Rails with Docker. Okay, and I need it to be only an API application. So let's run this. Now we created an application, so let's cd inside the application, and now we have our application on our local machine. Let's try to Dockerize it or create the container and the image of our application. So you can do that by having one file called Dockerfile. So let's at first open our application on VS Code. This is now our application on VS Code, and to Dockerize our application, we first need to build an image of our application. And how to do that? All we have to do is create a file called Dockerfile, and it needs to be exactly as that name, Dockerfile. Okay. This Dockerfile will have the configuration or the setup of our application is image, and the Dockerfile starts with from, and this from configure as the base image that our image will start from. So we need to start at the beginning from Ruby, as Ruby on Rails depend on having an environment of Ruby, but which Ruby we can choose from Docker Hub. Let's go to Docker Hub and choose one. Here we have our Docker Hub. Let's search for Ruby image, and we can get this official Ruby image from here. And you can find that here we have many tags. We have the Alpine tag, and also we have the pool says. We have also poster, slim, and we have the Ruby just without anything. Difference between them is with the dependencies and the image size. So we will use the Alpine, as the Alpine image is the minimal image that contains Ruby installed on it. It will have the minimal operating system, the minimal Unix operating system dependencies, and it's the smallest size between all the image tags. Okay, so we will use the Alpine. So let's add the tag which we will use. Okay, you can see here all the tags that you can use. And to use these tags, you have here to write the name of the image, which is Ruby, and with colon you can specify the tag. We will use Alpine as I said, but we can also choose the version of our image. Let's say we will use version 3.1.1. Okay, and after that you can specify which distribution of the tag, which is Alpine or Slim or whatever one. So I can choose the Alpine, and that's because, as we said, the Alpine is the smallest image, which has minimal dependencies, and that's useful to minimize the size of your image, so when you deploy it or share it, it doesn't have unneeded dependencies. So now we started from Ruby Alpine. So we have now a minimal Linux operating system dependencies. So we need to set up our environment to accept Ruby on Rails. We need some important dependencies, and we will install it by using the command line run, and run make me able to run some commands like internal to install whatever I want. And as we are using Alpine Linux distribution, so it doesn't use apt, but it uses apk. So apk add to add some dependencies or packages, and also to update if it has it already in our system. And we can specify a multi-line using this backslash, as this backslash make me able to go to the next line and continue with one comment. If you are not using that, you can make run in each line with each dependency you would like to add. But to run all of these commands in one line, we can add this backslash and go here to add the dependencies we need. So we will need to add something called the build base, and also MariaDB dev, so we can use MySQL database, and also SQLite dev, so we can use SQLite database, Node.js, so we can use Ruby and Ruby on Rails dependencies, and also something called tz data. And after that, we need to remove the unwanted packages which installed which is added to our file system to install these packages. So we can remove these by running remove this file, which have some cache of the APKs which we downloaded. So we need to remove all the cache that we don't need. And after that, we can start adding Ruby on Rails to our system without any problems, as we installed all the dependencies that our Rails application will need. So we can now run gem install bundler, and as this is a command that we need to run inside a terminal, so we need to add run before it. Now we installed the bundler. So now we need to specify where our application will be inside our container. So we can here specify our work directory to be maybe inside a folder called app inside our home directory in our container, not inside our local machine. As you know, the container has its own file system, has its own ports, has its own everything. It's isolated from our local machine. So now, as we specified the work directory, we can add our application, which is this one, okay, inside the Docker container. So we can now copy our application, which is the same directory as this Docker file exists in, which is dot, and we will copy this to the place inside the container, which is slash application, as we specified here. This is will be where our application will exist. And now, as we copied our application inside our Docker container, we can run bundle install, so it install all the dependencies inside our gem file, which includes also the same version of Ruby, the gem Rails. So it will install Rails with the same version we have in our local machine, and everything inside the gem file will be installed to our Docker container. So let's run here bundle install, so it install our application. And we also here might need to make sure that our gem file and gemfile.lock is copied to our application, as sometime this ignores the gem file, and I don't know why. So if you added this and something happened in your application and the image has some errors, make sure to also add the gem file and also the gem file.lock, and this will be inside our application, which is the current work directory here. And now we need to expose the port which we will use inside our Docker container to run our server. And as Rails server runs by default on the 3000 port, so we need to expose the 3000 port. And now we need to run our server, and to do that we use a cmd command or cmd word here, as this cmd provide the default which will be the executable place or the executable command to run the application you need. So the default executable part will be running the server, and we can do that by typing in the command, which is Rails server, okay, and specify binding /p to be 0.0.0.0, and this need to be inside a column. But as you know, when we run Rails server, it add a file which is a bed file, okay, process ID, and if we close the container and we try to open it again, it might have the PID file didn't closed in a correct way, or the bed file exists. So we need to make sure that this bed file is removed before we run our server. So we can here add that we need to remove and force it, okay, to remove the temp /beds/ server. Okay, we need to remove this file, and after we remove it, we run our Rails server command. So this way we make sure that our Rails server is running in a successful way all the time. And now this is the Dockerfile which we can use to build to run and build our application image. And to do that, all we have to do is open our terminal and run docker build and specify the tag version, as you need to specify the tag every time. And this tag can be the name, whatever the name you need to add. So let's add the tag to be Rails with Docker maybe. And after that, you need to specify where where is the image, or where is the Docker file that it will build, and this Docker file exists in our current location. So let's run this. And as you see, it tries to get each part. It tries to get the Ruby Alpine, and as it's the starting point, and after that it runs the commands to install and upgrade each image or each dependency we needed. And it might take some time, so let it take whatever the time it needs to install all the dependencies. And now, as you see, you can find that we successfully built the image which tagged as Rails with Docker latest. So let's make sure this image exists. So let's list all the images, Docker images. And here you can see that we have an image called Rails with Docker. So let's run it and run our application. So let's copy the name and let's use Docker run, and after that we need to specify the port. As you know, we exposed the port 3000 from our container, but we need to make a mapping, so the port 3000 in our local machine make sure to take our actions, or take our requests and map it to the port 3000 of the container. So we make a bind between the two ports, so we can communicate with the Docker container which have our application from our local machine. And we can make this bind by specifying the port to have our local machine port and bind it to the container port. And after that, we need to specify the name, which is Rails with Docker. So let's add it here, and let's run this application now, or this container now. And here we go. You can see that our Rails application is running on port 3000. Let's make sure that we can access this. So here, let's open localhost 3000. And here we go. You can see that we have our Rails application running. But now, how to deal with the application, how to open a terminal and run maybe a Rails console, run Rails DB migrate. As you know, this application is inside the container, not in our local machine, so we can't run the console in our machine, as the database is inside the containers and all these parts. So we can communicate with our application using, let's open a new tab, and here we can go inside the terminal of our Docker machine, like this terminal. Okay, we can communicate with our application from here. Okay, but we need to open the terminal of the container. We can do that by running docker execute interactive, and here we need to specify the name of the container, not the image. And after that we need here to run the shell. And if we run that, as you see, we don't have a container called this name, as this name is the name of the image. So we have to know the name of our container or the ID of our container. We can get it by using docker es, which is the processes that is running right now, and you can see that the container ID is here. So let's copy this container ID and run docker execute -t and this container and sh, and you can see that we are now inside the terminal of the container. We can run reads console to open the console, and as you see here we have the console of the application. Can also exit, can maybe run Rails generate a scaffold or whatever you need. So let's run Rails generate scaffold of maybe post, and this post will have a title of string and body of text, and let's run this. And now if we went back again to our application and went to posts route, it will redirect us that we need to run migrations. Okay, so let's run it from here, or you can run it from the console. And here we go, we have this route. But we will encounter one problem. As you see, we have now the running application with posts, and this post will have all the data. Okay, so we persisted some migration and data. Okay, so now let's close the container. So let's here go back and exit this, and here let's close by clicking Ctrl C. Now we don't have a running container. Let's make sure of that. So docker ps, we have no container running right now. Let's try to run the same container again, or the same image again. So let's run it. You can see that we have our server running. Let's go to our localhost 3000. We have our application, and if we try to go to posts, you will find that there is no route matches get/posts, and that's because the container starts from the image, and the image when it runs inside the container and we do whatever we do, it doesn't persist data. If you closed the container and opened the container again, it will start from the beginning. It doesn't have a persisting data. Either if we created a new file or added database data, all this data will be vanished once you close the container. So to make sure that we persist this data, we can create a volume which bind some space in our local machine to a specific folder or space in our container, and this way we can persist data. So if we added files from our local machine or added files from the container, both will persist as we bind our local machine storage with the container storage. So to do that, we need to here specify the volume when we run the application. So we can here specify the volume by adding here -v, which is the volume, to have either a name of the volume. Okay, we can add the name here, but let's ignore it now, and or we can add it. Let's add it here, reads with docker v, which is the volume name, and this will map to /eb. Okay, and let's run the application. Now our application is running. Okay, let's now try to go to our application, and let's go to support 3000. We have now our application running, and if we go to Posters, we will have nothing. So let's go to our console and get inside the container, but this container ID might change it. So let's get the new container ID, copy, and let's paste it here. Run. It need to be sh, and let's run raise generate scaffold again. Post. This post will have title, string, and body text. Let's run it, and let's this time run the raise dp migrate from the console. And let's go back to our application and refresh /posters. We will have it here. Let's close our container. Let's go here and Control C. As you see, we closed the application. Let's run it again, but you need to specify the same volume name, which maps to the same folder, which is the app folder. And if we run, let's go back to our application. Let's refresh /posters. You can find that our data exists, or our migration file and our models update. Each files which we created in the last session exists. And this is how you can run your Ruby on Rails application using Docker containers and build an image of your application with all its dependencies. In the next video, we will add Docker Compose, so we can use Ruby on Rails with MySQL database and add other dependencies, maybe like Sidekick or Redis, and each one of these services will be in a container, in a single container, and we will use or make a file called Docker Compose to make all these services can communicate with each other. So see you in the next video.